Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everyone. I'm Faust Chicho, your host, and today I'm sitting here once again with my friend Bill Softky. A little bit about Bill in case you've missed our episode with him. Bill is a biophysicist who was among the first neuroscientists to understand microtiming and among the first technologists to build that understanding into algorithms. Thousands have cited his scientific work. His PhD in theoretical physics is from Caltech. His name is on 10 patents, and two of the companies he inspired were acquired for $160 million total. So without further ado, I could go on about Bill's background and credentials for a long time, but we got too much to talk about. Bill, welcome back, man. It's great to have you. Thanks for beaming in.
Thank you. It's really fun to be here, and it's good to have a great audio connection to somebody I actually want to talk to. That's a nice change.
Yeah. The worst is when you have a good one to someone you don't want to talk to. You know?
There's lots of worse, so I don't want to go there.
That's true. You're wiser than I am. Man, after our last conversation, I was like, I reached out to Hunter, and I said, I got to talk to Bill more because there was just so much we didn't get to. I mean, we got to a lot, and it was great having you on, but we had so much to get into. So I'm so glad you're back.
It is cool. It sounds like a lot of things, but ultimately all I've got coming to the game is one very simple perspective, which is one of those things that once you see it, it's like, well, duh, of course that's how things work. And then all of the myriad separate things turn out to be one thing, and it's a little boring.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like it's like that with so many things. So man, trying to pin down all the questions that I want to ask you has been challenging, to say the least, but because you get in, you write so well, and you get into so much stuff that I'm like fascinated by, and I'm excited to get into some of these topics with you, but where to start? So I was reading what you wrote about neurochemical training, and and the recalibration that goes on in the human, in a human life, and it was really, it's profound what you wrote about how all our sensory data is coming in, and how it essentially becomes the root cause of our greatest pleasures, and of course, our what we would call suffering. And herein lies the all the joy and the strife that we experience in life. And I would love to hear a little bit more of your perspective about how those states, how they're input for us, and how they're responsible for all our pleasures and pains.
Well, the general thing which makes it so simple to understand once you get it is that we humans have been running around, and when people ask what does it mean to be human, we talk about our ability to tell stories, to remember things, to write language, to build technology, all these wonderful, cool things which no other animal on Earth is anywhere close to, right? And yes, that is what separates the human species from all the other animal species on Earth down to spiders. However, if you ask how our nervous systems work and how our bodies and metabolism work and stuff, suddenly we look a lot like other animals. Our brains look a lot like, they're the same temperature as, the other animals. Our body schemes are pretty much like bonobos and so forth. So it turns out that if you want to understand what we really need to stay alive, it's not just food and vitamins and a reasonable temperature range and stuff like that, but it's whatever it is the brain feeds on. Brains gather data, they do stuff with it, and then they make predictions, and hopefully the whole thing keeps running. But if you feed it the wrong data to start with, you don't know what's going to happen. If you train your self-driving car on a roller coaster, it might actually try to do jump ramps or something and not, be safe. So training data as a concept, the fact that our brains clearly evolved to operate in an environment very different than this one, and the fact that our brains learn, and the fact that our brains learn to do things based on the data and the environments they're in. This has been known for like 50 or 100 years in scientific form, and for thousands of years in just everyday form. That actually matters. And so in a bit, if you want, I can get into what it is that brains do, which is so amazingly simple. But the first thing we need to know is that the difference between whatever's happening to us now and whatever used to happen to us back in the day, Adam and Eve, traditionalist, whatever, it's got a lot to do with environment and a lot to do with the fact that brains learn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think about the profundity of what Bruce Lipton has, he's championed this, as I'm sure you're familiar with some of his work, or at least have.
Actually, no. Let's just pretend I'm not. I rely on the laws of math, and I don't actually read that much.
Okay, so Bruce Lipton he's a PhD. He's taught medical students for a long time, and I think he's got an Ivy League education. He happened to be one of the one of the doctors who was in New York City, very young at the time, when DNA first started to be cracked, and they of course looked at the DNA, and they looked at the genes, they looked at the blueprints, and hold on, what's going on with my audio? Did you hear that?
I just moved my microphone. That's all.
Okay. And they looked at the proteins, and they said, "What the hell? Well, we don't know. We don't know if there's anything to do with that." When they put all the proteins to the side, and they looked at the DNA and the genes and said, "This is everything. This is why we are who we are." And so this whole, the responsibility and kind of being doomed to your genes emerged from that thinking. And Bruce Lipton was one of the people who wrote a book called The Biology of Beliefs. And he talked about the science, the hard science behind the fact that our genes are signaled by our environment. That there's a blueprint there, but that blueprint has any number of expressions that it can take. And in fact, we know now that, of course, we have less genes than a flea. We have, I think genes have like 20,000 genes. How many genes do you? Yeah. But when we figured out how many genes we have, we said, what the hell? We thought we were the most complex creature on the planet. But a flea has more genes than us, which is a good way to remind yourself if you forget something, or just be like, what am I going to do? I'm only human.
My thing is that. So, are you going to some other point that I should have jumped in front of?
I was just going to say that it goes with what you were saying. We are we live in such symbiosis with our environments, and it affects not only our behaviors, but our health and everything else. And I don't, it's a big misnomer to overlook that, I think.
Okay, yeah. So let me take this one where you pointed about how Bruce Lipton's work was observing there's a lot more potential to how genes interact with the environment than the simple deterministic view showed you. And I want to jump in very early in the game, because otherwise it'll sound like I'm making rules up ad hoc as I go along. But there is a very important principle for how to know which kind of science trumps which other kind of science. Because we're in a land which likes to talk about evidence-based this and that, as if evidence were the gold standard. No, evidence is like the brass standard. It looks like gold, but it's not actually the same thing. The gold standard is validated theory, validated mathematical theory. And so if you want to understand which kinds of science have really done stuff, and which kind of science is kind of interesting and maybe a reason to investigate a little more, which are very different things. They're like a factor of 1,000,000 apart. The kinds of science which are based on what you see. They're based on observables. You have observed neurons. You have observed the states of matter, air, earth, or you mean plasma, liquid, gas, solid, that kind of thing. If you base your science on the stuff you see, you're going to get a reasonably good approximate answer, and you'll never get the right answer. For instance, when physicists or natural philosophers or whatever they call themselves based their understanding of matter on what they saw. Solid, liquid, gas, and then glowing stuff. Lightning, plasma, the sun, whatever. That's true. That actually counts for everything we see. And unless you do weird scientific experiments, you can't find anything which isn't one of those 4 states of matter. That is called alchemy. Air, earth, fire, and water. Yeah, that's what the world looks like. Yes, thank you. That's an improvement. But it doesn't say that, well, let's see, like needs to go with like. So now all liquids are somehow magnetically drawn to each other because we named them as the same thing, right? So the alchemists spent 1,000 years making up stupid things because they had the building blocks of their ideas were the stuff you can see and not the way things really work. It was Mendeleev with the periodic table of the elements who finally figured out that if you get electrons, say protons, neutrons, electrons, and electron orbitals, then you can understand molecules and all kinds of stuff, and you can actually make predictions about chemistry and not just have philosophical arguments about why your explanation is better than somebody else's explanation.
Which was physics.
Yeah, so chemistry and physics, when they decided to leave the outside observables and just rebuild completely from scratch based on a handful of components which together could explain stuff. That's how you got electrons and protons and neutrons. That's how you got the law of universal gravitation, Newtonian gravitation with all the wonderful elliptical orbits and black holes and stuff like that. Once you got the math and then redid things in the math, then you use the evidence to prove the math. But just gathering heaps of evidence just means you're being paid by Big Pharma or something like that. It means you got a budget. Yeah. Evidence requires money. But scientific conclusions requires theory followed by evidence which was taken in order to test that theory. You can't just pick up the evidence lying around that somebody else built. I mean, sometimes you can get away with it, but as soon as you're in an incentivized economy where somebody wants to repeat it based on whether it serves their business interest, it's done.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah.
That was a rant about science, and I will get to neuroscience at some point, but I want to hear where you're going to.
Well, no, I love it. It was a great rant, and I'm enjoying conversation because obviously this is a very hot topic right now with science being kind of paraded out and everyone saying, look at the science, but of course it's very specifically worded statistical science that has been I don't want to say manipulated, but it would be a good word for some of what has been going on. And I'm not going to get into all that. But it's just, you see this kind of, it's almost like a religion popping up about evidence-based science. And you hear people shouting and follow the science. But like everything else, if you figure out that the science is actually, a little bald guy behind a curtain pressing buttons, and you pull back the curtain and you're like, wait a minute, that's not science. That's the Wizard of Oz.
So having been a practicing scientist for a while, I spent roughly 10 years or 8 or 10 years as a neuroscientist. And then the rest of the time as a solo technology guy, essentially trying to invent the algorithms which make money off something. So those are very different jobs. And in the technology role, I was actually paid for results. I had to either give white papers, which made executives think I understood their data better than they did, or I needed to make algorithms or programs which actually worked and put the numbers in the right place and calculated something which made money. And that's a cool kind of challenge. I respect the Wall Street guys who do that kind of thing because it's a sort of a buck stops here thing. Either you got the mathematical chops to understand what's in the data that other people don't, or there's nothing there, or you don't. But it's not about just being able to put your name on something which looks good and making sure your name gets spelled right. That, unfortunately, is how regular academic science is done. Because all of a sudden, about 60 years ago, the academic system decided to reward tenure and promotion decisions and salary and all kinds of things based on publications. At that point, getting your name on publications became your number one job, and getting your grad students' name on publications, and getting you to cite them, and all just, it is secondarily about finding truth, but it's only about finding truth as long as your name is on it and you get the right recognition. And so a system which is designed to essentially publish the least publishable unit and make sure that all the citations are there. So you write a paper which says almost nothing, and then it has 100 footnotes on it. Because you got to make sure everybody that you owe political favors to gets cited there, whether or not it's relevant.
Yeah.
It basically makes the the understanding impenetrable. Not only are you not finding anything interesting, but you have to explain it in a way which is constantly referencing people who said wrong things in the past. It's hard enough to teach a new idea to somebody directly and bluntly the way I'd like to teach it to you. It's impossible if every other sentence you have to stop and say, well, as Schmidheim said here in some parenthetical thing which doesn't really matter, but I have to say it, blah. It's like, where were we? So basically, if you say the science, if you do the majority rule thing, 99% of the science you see is paid for. And most of that is paid for in order to get the researchers more science and more research money and stuff like that. Everybody knows that's how it works.
Yeah.
You take data in order to get money for the next round. But that isn't about clear truth. If you had clear truth, you wouldn't need any more science.
That's right. I was talking to a doctor today, a very respected psychiatrist. He's from Europe. He's been working in New York for probably 20 years. And he was telling me how he was speaking to some of his friends who are really top in their field, and they were told in no uncertain terms to keep their mouths shut about certain things that are happening today, and that if they spoke out about them, that their licenses would be revoked. And some of these guys are practicing physicians and working literally in the field. They have patients depending on them, and they told him, and I think some of them were still in Europe where he's from, some of them were here, but the message was the same. Whether you're an expert or not, if you're not saying the same thing as us, keep your mouth shut. Mm-hmm. And that's not science in any way, shape, or form. That's mind-blowing to me. That is going on is mind-blowing. But yeah, that's maybe a different podcast.
Well, I had a weirdly charmed existence because in grad school I didn't actually know that sort of thing happened. So when I discovered that the model of neurons, which everybody had been relying on for 30 years, was demonstrably obviously wrong in staring you in the face ways, I got a lot of attention. I mean, it was fun to run around saying that neuroscience is wrong about stuff. But later, I got to be, the data analyst, and I got to do the stuff to figure out what was right. And with neuroscience, you can't get to the answer if you assume it's about measuring neurons. If you assume the premise of neuroscience, which is we can't understand the brain until we measure the neurons inside the brain which did things, you're leaning on the most unreliable, dicey source of data you can get, and you're closing off the most reliable source of insight which exists in the universe. The same kind of thing that Isaac Newton worked off. So neuroscience as a discipline is built around not just prolonging the names and the publication records of the people who are already in it, which is true of all science, but it's built around some uniquely wrong and untenable assumptions about the nature of information processing. But because it was started by people, it was started 100 years before anyone invented information. Claude Shannon, it was 1940-something. Claude Shannon came up with bandwidth and bits and bytes in information theory. 100 years before that, they discovered neurons in frogs moving the metal needles on galvanometers. So they had neuroscience had 100 years to wonder what these funny little cells are before the math could tell them that they're totally useless. And unfortunately, it's hard to turn that ship around.
So, I know that's one of the things you got most frustrated with, and why you kind of left I don't want to say left the field entirely because you're still working in the field, but I think you stopped working in kind of mainstream neuroscience. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was weird. I went in and out at least once. So through grad school, I was doing mainstream neuroscience, or rather, insofar as I had a totally mainstream advisor, I got access to the very best data. I was in a wonderful place. Caltech, at the very beginning of their computational and neural systems program, was like being in Solvang in 1927 with quantum mechanics. It was like the exact right people, the right place, total intellectual ferment. I joined my advisor, Christoph Koch, the same week that he gave his talk with Francis Crick about oscillations and consciousness, stuff like that. And I joined it to be on that project. So as a neuroscientist, so I got to roll with the heavies there. It's just my first main claim was so far outside what everybody believed. I was basically waving the banner of math, saying that everybody else is wrong. 2 + 2 is actually 4, and the fact that everybody has been assuming it's 100 and quoting everybody else assuming it's 100 still doesn't work. It's still 4. And the thing I invoked was called by the complicated name of the central limit theorem.
Central limit theorem.
Central limit theorem, which says that certain kinds of probability distributions, like bell curves, tend to get narrower over time as you add more things to them and stuff. It's the thing behind grade point averages and stuff. So it turns out that it's also called the law of averages. The idea that averaging stuff makes less noise than without averaging it. Okay, so we use the law of averages all the time. But I got a major neuroscientist say to my face, the central limit theorem is just a theorem. Which, translated in science speak, is the law of averages optional depending on what my grant committee wants. The laws of math are not optional. It's just that since neuroscientists don't understand information transmission, and they don't understand computation, and they don't understand representation and signal processing, they don't understand what the brain is trying to do. All they understand is they took a bunch of data and they need to put a curve on it to be able to get more money to get more data. It's an understandably self-referential system, but it doesn't get to the gist of what brains are about, and it avoids it.
What did you insist that they were in denial of?
Well, so there are 2 big giant things I've insisted on, and they happen 20 years apart. So the thing in grad school, back in like the early 90s, was a simple thing. Later I'll talk about 3D mind, which is how the brain is a 3D processor, and that explains. That's basically the answer. But the question that I stumbled across was when my advisor, Christoph, presented me with a task. A first task as a beginning grad student. Here, make a bunch of oscillators which oscillate. Because you're a physicist. It's like you put metronomes on a table or clocks on a table and they start going in synchrony, right? That's how it works. That is resonance. That is how physics works. I wanted in my little project to add one new thing, which a normal physicist would not have done. But I was a kind of a hacker, sort of shortcut kind of physicist guy. I started off in tinkering with TV jammers and was a laser jock at Bell Labs. So I didn't come to theory, honestly. I didn't come in because I'm really good at math. I came in because I'm really good at like building things which are interesting and thinking a lot. But the math thing I was sort of behind. And so in this case, it turns out that the central limit theorem says a neuron ought to be averaging out noise. If it's doing this thing, it's gathering up lots of neural pulses, and then it's trying to spit out new pulses. It should be averaging out noise because it's taking in randomness and, doing the average thing. But in this process, I was trying to make some little neuron oscillators, which would kind of oscillate with each other, but I wanted them to use pulses to communicate like real neurons do. So the shift from talking about oscillators, which is a truly continuous spinning kind of thing, to talking about pulses, which go dit, 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 like that, those are really different textures. One is truly continuous, one is as discrete and punctile as possible. And it turned out I couldn't square the circle. I tried to just make one neuron. Forget coupling them. Forget making them ring together. Just make one neuron whose output pulses, dit, 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 look reasonably like those of real neurons and also result from adding up the pulses which come in. Those are the 2 constraints. One is the neuron kind of adds up and averages its pulses. The other is the output looks like a real one. Problem. And this is where it was great to be at Caltech and have the data from the Van Essenet lab and the Newsom lab. Megabytes of data, awake behaving macaque monkey. This was like a live brain. It was as good neural data as I could ever hope for. I did the statistics on it. I ran all these little scripts to pile the things into histograms and look at variability. Turns out those neurons are practically random. If you listen to them, they aren't. Nope. It's more like. And in fact, my best talk ever at like 8:30 in the morning, couple hundred sleepy neuroscientists, I contrasted the regular neural pulses, which you get sort of like, like from a comb over a card, with what you hear in a lab if the animal is actually doing something. And I peeled Velcro. It was this crackly noise, and everybody in the room jumped up and looked around, like, where did the sound come from? Because that is the sound of neurons in the lab. It's crackling. It is not a buzz. It is a crackle. Now, it turns out that if your neurons are adding up a lot of stuff, a lot of randomness, like the central limit theorem, the whole point of adding up randomness is so you have less randomness.
Right.
You have the constant, you have the average, and you're throwing away the variability.
Right.
Well, if a neuron's job is to throw away the noise, then how come the output is 100% noise? Yeah. 30 years, they weren't thinking about that. They would literally, a lot of the papers would make a neuron which added up everything. It had this nicely smooth output. But since it was smooth, they decided to put a random number generator into their paper to create the randomness so it would look real. It was a total cheat.
Yeah.
Neuroscience was evading a central contradiction at the core of everything it was looking for. That essentially averaging out variability is necessary for showing experimental results to the outside world. I mean, these neurons are tiny, and you have to add up lots of stuff to show something to the outside world. But a brain is an information processing thing. Its job is to use the tiniest signals it possibly can, the most nanoscopic, minuscule things, just like a transistor IC, right? 1 billion transistors on an IC, 10 billion neurons in a brain, but the same principle. They need to be as small signals as possible so you can have as many.
Right.
These giant bomb things where, a neuron can move a piece of metal in the outside world, that is not the smallest nature can do. We need to look at the smallest nature can do, not the big obvious things that we can record with our meters.
Right.
And that's where neuroscience went wrong. It's building its concepts on stuff because it was observable, not because it makes mathematical sense.
Wow. I'm just remembering the amazing metaphor that I mean, like, not really a metaphor, I guess. It's just like it's quite possible that maybe you have a differing opinion, but when I look out at the world and I see the way that we teach our young people and the way that the majority, I would say, of people think about what we are in this three-dimensional world we're living in these bodies, I think that, for the most part, almost everyone, not everyone, but a very majority percentage of people have it wrong, because they think that we are this body and that we're this, that kind of consciousness is coming from our brain, and that, it's like everything is kind of backwards. It's like upside down. When actually, there's no sign of, you could look at a human brain under a microscope until the cows come home, and you're not going to find any sign of, the origin of consciousness. You know what I'm saying? It's a organic, biomechanical machine, but it's not, we're not originating from it. And we certainly didn't, that's certainly not who we are. And I just think of like this material world we're living in, and I'm like, wow, how did we get so, and then get so kind of turned upside down? But we're young. We're a young species.
Material world. That's your answer. You've put half an hour worth of really cool discussion topics into that observation. But to take it up, so I'll say one thing I can come back to later if you want, and that is the fundamental property, the thing at which brains absolutely excel, is fooling themselves. Roughly speaking, if you just, and this is a short version I can go into if you care, if you look at your visual world, so I'm assuming you're a sighted person or you're wearing glasses, your eyes work like most humans do. You look around, if you can appreciate an HDMI screen, that's kind of like a few million grains of sand behind a piece of glass, and they're little blinky grains of sand. That's about how big they are. And if you can appreciate that and see those and appreciate how small and fast those pixels are, Cool, that's nice. That tells you how good you are with those grains of sand. But your 3D world is, imagine taking grains of sand and filling everything out to 50 yards in every direction, above, below, behind. All those grains of sand is the resolution of your 3D system. So all of the stuff we talk about a 2D system is like 1/1,000,000th of the resolution of the 3D system, which is what we're built for. So the only way we can make sense of the world and see straight lines where there's straight lines is by faking it. Because we might be pretending to see 100 teravoxels or something like that. We look at the world, it looks real and crisp. But I promise you are only getting one actual neural data point for every million of the voxels that you're simulating in your head. So all it really takes is appreciating the 3D world, what resolution we have, then looking at the data we have to make sense of that, and realizing there's such a mismatch that now you'll have to realize we're good at fooling ourselves. We must be really good at hiding how much we're making up. So that's where we came from. We're so good at hiding from how much we make up that you can go through life thinking that what you are seeing is the real world and not your simulation of the real world.
It's just like the movie The Matrix.
Yeah. So close enough that I'll stand behind it. But you said the material world. And here is the grand, horrible, wonderful contradiction of the human species, unique among all species on this planet. But it's a contradiction that I bet would happen on Mars or some other faraway place in the universe, even with a non-carbon-based life form, if that species were fortunate or unfortunate enough to be a quadruped, which stood up on its hind legs and pulled its hands free of the ground. The transition to being bipeds is what made Homo sapiens really cool and weird. And the closest we've got is bonobos, who are sort of half bipeds. And a lot of their social interactions and a lot of their complexity of thought seems to be related to that. But what happened to us, which has not happened to them or chimps, is that we learned to make things. So the forelimbs come up, they're hands, and first they're used to caress and touch each other. So of course we lose our body hair and we're probably just all into like cuddle parties all day long. I mean, there's no TV or internet. I mean, what else is there to do by the campfire for 1,000,000 years?
Right.
So we had sensitive skin. We had hands which were no longer scraping the ground, so they could do anything. Clearly we learned to dance. Clearly we learned to wave around and make gestures and throw things and stuff like that. But the magic happened after a couple million years of that. At some point, our ancestors started making tools which were interesting and which really worked. Not just a kind of extra sharp rock, but something which could really cut stuff. Something you could really throw a spear or something, or a little ornament which really looked like a woman or made a note like a flute or something.
Yeah.
We made cool stuff. Yeah?
Yeah.
What were you saying?
Oh, yeah. I was agreeing. Yeah.
Cool. So problem was no other species had ever been able to make things. But we made things which attracted our sensory system. We made figurines which looked like our species. Mm-hmm. We made interesting curved shapes. We made flutes which made sounds which were pure and simple like birds or something. We made cave paintings which looked like animals we wanted to eat. We made things which were so interesting and compelling that our ancestors 35,000 years ago would sit their butts on the cave floor and stare at the damn rock wall instead of going out and either procreating or looking for more food. So the original sin is art. The original sin is the ability to make something which captures the attention more than nature does. Because our attentional system evolved for a purpose. It evolved to keep us alive by having our eyes look at what mattered in the savannah in a boring world with no bright colors and nothing sparkly. That's the sensitivity we have. But because we like it, now we make it. Because we make it, we're saturating ourselves, so we have to get even brighter flickery lights. So it is the material culture, the fact that we can make things which interact with our perceptual and sensory system, is the root cause of practically every way in which humankind has gone awry. Because it subverts our normal communication by sounds and grunts and butt slaps, and it turns it into some sort of lingering set of symbols which have the ability to manipulate our brains but aren't actually real. And
it's like an illusion on an illusion on an illusion, and it becomes so so depth, and that it's almost like we get more and more stuck in it. The more layers of illusion that we delve into.
Yeah, I mean, once you basically, the way to understand how the brain works is by asking how it could possibly work given it seems impossible in the first place. And then once you get to, so that's how you can be confident this is how it works. It couldn't possibly work any other way, and it could barely work this way. But this way doesn't even involve memory, really. A brain evolved 500 million years ago to control a spine, a sea snake. It's basically a coordinated worm. A worm which knows how to undulate and not just thrash. That's what we're built on. Fins, optional. Legs, optional. Eyes, optional. Ears, probably optional. All you really need is a mouth and a gut, and a tail, and you're off to the races. And that's the motor architecture it takes to control muscles. As far as I know, neuroscience doesn't know how a brain actually fires muscles at the microsecond level of precision that's necessary to listen to the echoes and fire more muscles. Closing the control loop of brain firings with muscle activation, I think, is a fascinating biomechanical problem, but since people aren't studying it, it's not being published, and it's not being rewarded, it's not being paid for, so every given brilliant researcher is doing something else.
Yeah, and all the good stuff is collecting dust somewhere. It's like, what is going on? I just wish we could reorganize everything. But I was just saw something I was watching a documentary, and they were talking about how they were testing a woman who has shown a strong psychic proclivity in the past, and she was they were measuring her brain waves, and they were testing, and if she was coming up with the emotion that she was going to feel with the picture that they were showing her before they showed her. So they were, there was like a precognition ability that she was displaying, and whether the picture was like this terrible war-torn body or you know what I mean, like that the hints that emotion would show up before they flipped it for her, and so I always am baffled and fascinated by the part of our mind that is plugged into what's going to happen, because I experience it all the time. I just get a feeling, and then bam, I just know that person's going to call me, or I think of them, and then all of a sudden they're messaging me. It's just, and it happens to me like I've gotten used to it, but I'm always like, what is it in our minds, or I should say, in our spirits, maybe that's kind of plugged into everything that could potentially happen.
An unconventional answer to that. So cool. The usual physicist version is all a bunch of hooey, and people are making it up, and there's selection bias and bias in what you remember and stuff like that. And in principle, that could be true. I mean, insofar as the entire principle our brains is working on is selection bias. I just said we're 1,000,000 to 1 selection biased in favor of models of three-dimensional reality, which makes sense. It's like, yep, placebo effect is absolutely a big player. It's the only reason we can get anywhere. So yeah, the hard-nosed physicists who say, get off my lawn, you dastardly kids, that's part of it. The next layer are essentially the physicists who are trying to cross over to the hippie crowd and to talk spiritual stuff. And that's like, well, the universe is connected to everything, and that's what quantum mechanics teaches us. So every wave function is overlapping with every wave function. We're infinitely connected, and so whenever we ohm, you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
It's it's this foggy mental thing, which is technically true. Quantum mechanics does say everything is connected to everything, but quantum mechanics also says by how much. You get to put numbers on it. And that's where, there is an electron at the edge of the universe, this tiny infinitesimal thing, infinitely far away. Yeah, it kind of affects me, but kind of no. You calculate it. So it's like, and so that's the thing which frustrates me, because in my core, I am as hard-nosed as the most skeptical of the physicists. I had arguments with my dad. My parents were both nuclear physicists. And my dad went over to, believing in psychic phenomena and telepathy and stuff like that. And I would argue
came over to my
him.
side of the force.
Yeah, I would argue against him. Yeah, I actually grew up with Star Wars. I was 14 when it came out. It was wonderful. But as the science, for me, the force is the force of mathematical law. Given how much randomly wrong stuff is floating around us, even in real life, but especially on the internet. I mean, the wrong stuff is better monetized. So of course we're drowning in it. Given how much round stuff there is, the only thing I know to really rely on, and the only thing I ever relied on as a data scientist, is mathematical obviousness. I mean, you start with laws of math which just have to be true. Things like 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
And then you see what's left. And it turns out with brains, there isn't anything left. You apply the simplest laws of information, representation, and transfer to what brains do, to this weird process of making sense of a 3D world via a thunder shower of neural pulses going around the optic nerve, right? Once you understand that kind of a problem, you're in a place where the laws of math are the only thing going on. You don't have a chance to go back to evidence or anything.
But what about, how do you account for intuition then? Like, I mean, I know that you are a person who has intuition.
Well, yes, of course. Well, that's the magic of it. What I'm saying is, did you get a sense of what the message of quantum mechanics was? You know, quantum mechanics is a big thing. People wave their hands about it because I can make a great analogy, but only if it works for you.
I mean, I have gotten more than a sense of quantum mechanics over the years. I'm a big believer in it to the extent that I experience and understand it. Now, does that mean that I could teach a course on it? Absolutely not. Math has never been my strong suit, but one of the things I can do remarkably sometimes is, without a thought, if someone throws, I mean, this isn't quantum mechanics, but I say math isn't my strong suit, but if someone throws a calculation at me, 54 times 512, I'll just say the answer without a thought. Nice. I don't even know where it came from, but
I can't do that.
It's like I just pull it out of the ether, but I couldn't do the math on a page if you paid me.
And that sounds a little like my grad student experience. The way I got through my first year of Caltech was I teamed up with this amazing mathematician named Michal, and she could do the math, but I could picture the answer. So they say, well, there are 3 bowling balls floating in space, or no, 4 connected by springs in a tetrahedron. What are the ways in which they vibrate? And I just ran my little mental simulator and saw the different ways in which they could vibrate. And I described what they would look like. And then she figured out how to do the equations to get us there. Because I could not get to the end of a page without dropping a minus sign. Right. Or adding one.
So would you say that was your intuition and imagination combining with your intellect?
There are 2 aspects to math, and the word math confounds them. But it's basically like the 2 aspects to numbers. I'd say continuous and discrete. But for physicists and mathematicians, there's a continuous visualization where you just get good at imagining time as like a corkscrew spiral or something like that, and so you can kind of see how it worked. Nikola Tesla was super genius for this. Tesla imagined magnetic fields moving through the air and intersecting with electrical wire, with copper wire, which was spinning. So he imagined these 3-dimensional twisty things spinning around, interacting with other 3-dimensional twisty things. And his vision was what allowed him to actually invent motors and generators.
Yeah.
So the visualization bit, basically using your brain as a 3D simulator to see what the laws of nature would do if they got to run free. That is the deepest and proudest thing. That is how atomic energy was understood. It's how Tesla did electromagnetism. It's how radio waves were done, which was also Tesla. Newton did it that way. Einstein figured out relativity by imagining what it was like to surf on a light wave. He's like, suppose I'm right next to the light wave. It's moving at the speed of light. I'm moving at the speed of light. What does that look like?
Right.
And it was, does not compute. And that's the kind of thing I stumbled on as a grad student, right?
Yeah.
You try to make some simple thought experiment and you realize it does not compute, which just means you got lucky enough to find a law of math that other people have ignored.
Right.
And it now tells you something about what's going on. So I can't remember why I was proclaiming the laws of math so hard there. It was in response to something you said, but I got so excited about,
I was
evangelizing math that I forgot the point.
I think I asked you about your intuition and imagination and how it combines with your intellect to,
right.
Because I understand what you're saying about math and how, it is an essential part of the fabric of everything, right? I mean, I understand how things are made up of math and geometry. But also, I guess, but then I wonder, like someone like who is so math orientated like you are, like how you account for intuition and imagination, and but you are sharing how much it factors in.
It's the same way that quantum mechanics was ultimately built on a confluence of math and math weirdness and experimental weirdness, which showed up at the same time and turned out to be the same thing. The math weirdness was you could have these things called matrices, where you multiply them in the order matters. So A times B is not the same as B times A. Now it turns out that's just a thing. Nobody knew things like that before, but here it is. They discovered it around the turn of the century. Meanwhile, there are other things being discovered where electrons are jumping around in ways they shouldn't. And you can turn the light up really bright, but if it's not the right color, nothing happens. But if it's really dim, but it's a different color, something happens. It's like, what's going on here? Turns out those two things overlapped. And what you might remember from quantum mechanics, sort of at the general hand-wavy version of the lessons for everybody, one of them is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The idea that there's some little tiny thing like a particle moving around in some way that you care about. And if you want to measure it, you can only measure it so well. You can either measure exactly where it is and pretty much lose track of what time it got there, or how fast it's moving, say. Or you can measure exactly how fast it's moving, but you're not sure where or when it is. But the more you it's basically like a balloon full of water. The more you squeeze it one way, the more it pushes out the other way. So there's this fundamental uncertainty buried in the measurement process, the quantum uncertainty, which only gets so small and you cannot make it any smaller. That is a huge piece of quantum mechanics. It turns out that's also true for understanding how brains work. The other piece that quantum mechanics went way far into is the notion between quantization, that's quantum, chunks of stuff, as opposed to just kind of slippery continuous stuff, mechanics. And mechanics is just things which move and have momentum and speed and so forth. So the idea is, how can things move and have momentum in chunks? What does it mean to move in chunks? It's like Zeno's paradox returns to bite you or something. So quantum mechanics realized that once you make a measurement, you have frozen a number in time, and if you freeze a number in time, in some sense you have to freeze it in space and amplitude too. So to make a frozen measurement, to take a continuous world and try to take a picture of it, interferes with that world in some degree, and also imposes certain uncertainties on your answer. Okay?
Yeah.
And you can say that's true of electrons and protons and stuff, and it absolutely is. But it's also true of information in general.
Yes.
And the most famous physicist, or one of the most famous physicists of the 20th century, he was the mentor of Richard Feynman. His name was John Wheeler. And I got to see him at Caltech once. He signed up to give this talk in this little tiny room in East Bridge. And I showed up there half an hour early, and I was sitting on a chair. And 10 minutes before the talk started, I remember Professor Kip Thorne showing up, the guy who got a Nobel Prize a couple years ago for gravitational waves. He had to sit on the floor because he didn't come in time, right? But the guy who was giving the talk, John Wheeler, was his own advisor, and also the advisor of Richard Feynman, who was that crazy brilliant guy who invented quantum electrodynamics and sat on the Space Shuttle Commission and things like that. And John Wheeler is the guy who coined the term black hole. And once, that was how badass he was. He used the term black hole like once in a talk,
and that was
the perfect time, and then everybody copied.
The black hole became the black hole, just like that. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And this was at a time when I was in grad school, they hadn't confirmed that black holes were actually the energy source.
Oh, that's right. They were still theory, right?
Yeah. So like there was on the wall there was this little framed bet between Kip Thorne and Stephen Hawking.
Wow.
Which was saying that one of them would prove that a black hole was or wasn't at the core of galactic something or other. And there was a different one about naked singularities, which involved the subscription to Playboy or something like that. But there were these sort of joking bets on the wall that Kip Thorne had with various people, and they weren't resolved at that point. But yeah, black holes were a conjecture. Physicists knew that there wasn't really anything else out there, but until it was experimentally confirmed, you just have to say active galactic nucleus and wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But John Wheeler...
They got it right anyway. They were, it's amazing that and it's so well phrased when the more they learn about them and what we do know about them. What better way to describe it than a black hole? It's kind of perfect.
The cool thing is, it all comes from Einstein's original insight. So his first relativity theory was that, well, if it feels like you're sitting still even when you're moving fast, let's just pretend that's true. That there is no difference between sitting still and moving fast, no matter what. It's just they're the same thing.
Right.
And so that's where his first relativity theory came from. Then he came up with a similar thing which said, well, suppose that falling in free fall is, through acceleration, like, you're dropped out of an airplane. Suppose that is the same as sort of sitting still, or suppose that being under gravity is the same as being pushed, right? So having a force on you is the same whether you're in gravity or whether there's a rocket ship pushing on your butt. That insight, that equivalence, allowed him to make predictions about how gravity works, about how mass is attracted to other mass, about how gravity has waves. And ultimately, somebody a couple decades later named Schwarzschild figured out that it also means there's this collapse where if you get too much gravity, nothing gets out.
That's right.
And so both black holes and gravitational waves, which were Kip Thorne's thing, were mathematical consequences of the nature of essentially space-time. Mm-hmm. And so Einstein figured out that space-time just has to have certain properties. He predicted that in 12 or something like that. He got a confirmation a couple years after. During World War I, they looked at an eclipse and they saw a star bend a little. So he said, show gravity bent light. But the gravitational waves and the black holes were like 50 or 100 years in the future.
Yeah.
Kip Thorne got the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. That's like 100 years after the prediction. But it had to be true. And so that's the kind of law we're talking about. I'm not talking about evidence-based stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about something which is so intrinsically part of the nature of perception, you can't imagine it being anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and I still have to answer your intuition question.
Oh, go for it.
Well, this whole quantum mechanics thing is saying essentially there's a trade-off between how you let something go and how you record it. And the more you record it, the more you interfere with it. Now, in computer programming, there's a similar idea that you can write your program while you're debugging it. Every third line, it says, print the value of X and tell me if it makes sense or not. So you have all these print statements, and you're always having your program essentially record stuff for you to look at later so you can figure out if it's working. Fine. Good. That's good programming practice. I do that. Yes, hooray. But that slows it down. If what you want is a program which is optimized for just doing its damn job because you know you programmed it right, it's not recording anything. Zero. The process of executing in real time is in competition with the process of recording things for later. Which means your ability to self-assess by asking how you were doing and keeping track of your mental steps is undermining the very process of cognition. That's why your intuition shows up. The only kind of thought we can really do well is intuitive. Yeah. If you're recording your mental steps, you are slowing yourself down so horribly, you are probably not doing a good job. Done.
So you could not have segued more appropriately into my next question, which maybe it wasn't my next question, but I was going to, I was reading your what you were writing about AI and about, after you read the Genius Makers.
Cade Metz. I knew him like ages ago. He's cool.
Yeah, Cade Metz, and he wrote a book called Genius Makers, the Mavericks Who Brought AI to Google, Facebook, and the World. And you were talking about the two different types of AI that I think they focus on in that book, and saying how, one aspect of it, it can be set to independently act, and another aspect of it has to, works more efficiently because it works off of labels, I believe. But you said the one that works independently will have to inevitably collect data all by itself, much the way human beings do. And this is, it's like, I think you were writing how that's less efficient than one that can kind of refer to humans for labels and stuff like that to help give it parameters. It learns quicker. And it's just amazing the correlation between what you're saying about our brains and about how this aspect of AI works. I think.
I mean, the sad, and it's wonderful and sad, is that learning as an informational process is just a thing. It's a thing for Roombas, it's a thing for self-driving cars, and it's a thing for human beings. It's the same thing. It's a matter of ingesting data and using that data to sculpt the response properties of the circuit so that in the future it does something better, maybe getting more data, maybe performing something else. But the process of learning depends on information. It depends on the circuit properties. It is just what it's supposed to be. Now, the deep AI people, and I hate the name deep AI because it's not, it's absolutely artificial. I don't think it's intelligent in any way we understand it. And it's deep in the sense of, in a technical sense, which allows it to be super complicated, as opposed to deep in the sense of being simple and easy to understand, which is kind of how we work.
Or profound, or,
Yeah. But there's basically, I would say there's 2 or 3 different regions of learning that these technology systems do. One is essentially learning categorical associations from an existing pile of data, like natural language processing. You go look through 20 years worth of paragraphs which were translated from either from a voice onto text or from one text language to another or something like that. And so now you run your algorithm and you have it look at all of this existing data and see if it can understand it better than the last one. That's fine, but it depends on the data being good. Now, if your corpus, if the digital stuff that you're training your algorithm on were recorded like 30 years ago, before people were using the internet much, that's good English. But if you're looking at web pages which were search engine optimized to make Google's algorithm happier, that isn't English. That's a bunch of keywords.
Or using the messages exchanged between teenagers these days.
Or more accurately, I mean, given how so Twitter and Facebook, but especially Twitter, have a lot of bots on them, right?
Yeah. There
is a reason for, and it is absolutely possible, since you can't tell if it's a real person, to make something which tweets or posts utterances which look like a human. And it's possible to make another thing which responds to those in ways which kind of look like a human.
So that's what people say when they're like, oh, that's you're, I don't know. People are like, that's a Russian bot. When they say that, they're talking about what, like programs that supposedly the Russians designed to write things that will infuriate Americans, like shit like that. Is that?
I can't speak to what people are talking about in any given moment, but there are basically, and this is again the question between evidence-based and theory-based. If you say evidence-based, you have to say, well, here was a news report, and there were these Russians, and this was bot, and it talked to these people, and it said these things. So hooray. Now, after all that discussion, you have a theory of one program which existed in the past.
Right.
Not necessarily going to tell you what's happening in the future, right? And that's the problem with evidence-based stuff. It not only depends on who paid for the evidence, but it's always backward-looking. But if you understand the monetization incentives of what you might call contrast enhancement, which is a really horribly neutral abstract term. Now, if you're taking a picture, if you take a Xerox image, or you take an image, you put it on a copier machine, photocopy it, out comes something which is going to be a little bit crisper. It's sharpened the edges, so it's good for text. But if you do that over and over and over, like 10 times in a row, you'll get something which is just hash, because it's overdone it. It's overdone the contrast enhancement. But contrast enhancement exists on the internet in the space of ideas. A post is more interesting if it says, no, this thing is not like this, right? And a post or a point which criticizes something or points out a difference is somehow more interesting than something which says, yeah, me too, it's all the same, right? We basically, our informational appetites have an appetite for difference and novelty.
Yeah.
And so everywhere on the internet are all these things to look for differences and novelty to feed us.
Hmm.
But when we're essentially feeding our systems on just the edges and we've lost the sense of where the actual gray and the subtlety is,
Yeah.
it's literally fracturing cognition. So
Yes.
the same kinds of algorithms which do video enhancement also propagate hate and lies and misdirection and all kinds of other bad things. It's the nature of this amplification
Hmm.
that it messes with our data in ways that is both attractive and wrong.
And so let me tell you what I think is the bigger problem with those algorithms and why these tech companies are, I sometimes I check out this YouTube site where the guy draws everything there's a speaker speaking in, I think it's called After School, and great. I'll send you a link.
Hmm.
He uses his amazing illustrative ability to, he'll take a 15-minute speech by someone like Dr. Zach Bush, who speaks about regenerative farming and gut health and the dangers of glyphosate and the chemical companies and how they're poisoning the ground. And he'll take a 15-minute speech and illustrate it. And whenever he goes to represent the titans of big tech, he draws them as the Lord of Rings, the Eye of Sauron.
Uh-huh.
They're amassing this evil army. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a great representation of them, because what they don't realize they're doing with their algorithms is they're creating this environment where this feeling is being kind of duplicated and perpetuated and replicated by humanity, because it's what they're seeing, and then they're predicting based on what they're seeing, of course.
Yes. That is that is contrast enhancement.
Yes.
If you make a prediction and then you act on the prediction and you get results which reinforce the prediction, that is a rut. That is the mathematical description of falling into a rut. And I mean, so my partner is very active in an organization called Fair Play, which is trying to protect kids from the predations of a lot of this stuff. But it turns out that the bad things which happen when you find out what bright colors toddlers like to press on and then put more of them in front of them, right? You're basically hacking past the toddlers' instincts for learning about the world, and you're just basically giving them crack for the eyeballs. It's the same kind of algorithmic manipulation as results in essentially racist algorithms. Of all the different movies out there, there's one called Coded Bias by a woman, Shalini Kantiya, featuring Joy Bulamwini and Kathy O'Neill and a bunch of other people. But it's describing algorithmic racism. And the short version is, if you take a bunch of algorithms and you train them on data from 10, 50 years ago, which had lots of racism in it, they'll learn to reproduce the racism. If you take a voice bot like the Tay one Microsoft had, and you put it on the internet to try to figure out what people say under what circumstances, it'll come out spouting racist bile. So it turns out that the contrast enhancement is just as good at promoting racism and hate and so forth as it is at addicting kids to video games or Facebook. It's like one algorithm to rule them all. And as you're saying, the Eye of Sauron,
oh my God.
Our nervous systems evolved to only make sense of what was near us. It's a miracle that we can even make sense of the 3D world within arm's reach. Everything else, everything showing up through pixels, is demonstrably fake. Our nervous systems cannot judge the truth or the falsehood of pixels. So if a system like the Eye of Sauron is observing us, it's observing exactly how many times a day, down to the millisecond, that we're online. It observes exactly which colors of pixels that we respond to, what kind of microtones in the music that we like listening to. It can measure how our pupils dilate. These cameras and these things can measure your blood pressure, your breath rate, your heart rate, all kinds of stuff. Biometrics up the wazoo. So if we are being seen like the Eye of Sauron, but we can't see what it's doing, that is an informational asymmetry, we have lost the bandwidth arms race. Because in nature, out there in nature, if one creature gets to do all the seeing and the other creature is blind, which one eats which one?
Exactly. exactly. And that's what's been happening. And look at the rise to power. I mean, some of these companies are as big as and as powerful as any country, and they've infiltrated every aspect of a lot of governments. And, it's some shady things, but you hit it exactly. It's like, you don't realize what you're creating until it's Frankenstein running around,
One thing it's really easy when you're describing the world of what you see out there. It's really easy to focus on the true awfulness of what happens when our primary technology and our primary economic system is designed at undermining and exploiting how our brains work.
Yeah.
That it is the idea that automated deception at scale is considered a good, positive economic benefit. Yeah. Our economy, really, we're getting richer by fooling each other? How is that supposed to work?
Right.
So this is like bleak and bad news, and I have yet to meet somebody who actually thinks clearly who doesn't also find it bleak. So in some sense, the evil people who are rubbing their hands at the demise of the human species, I've yet to meet them.
Yeah.
I'm in fact willing to think that the spreadsheets are the problem, because the spreadsheets are telling them what to do, and that's the problem, right? The problem is the spreadsheets are telling us to drive off a cliff. But what I'd love to get to mention is all of the good news, which is buried in the same equations which show us how bad tech is. Yeah. Because for every equation which says tech is bad for us, there's another equation which says some stupid little thing like a piece of, carbon or a piece of tungsten or something like that is actually going to help you. And so being able to jack back into your own nervous system.
Yeah.
Being able to understand what your nervous system really is supposed to do and how to recognize when it's doing that thing. That allows you to basically just give up on tech. I have no fascination with screens now. I've discovered real life.
Yeah. I'm working on that more myself. I mean, getting back away from screens, but obviously part of my job and my joy is being in front of when I'm talking to awesome people like you. But anyway, two things I want to talk about. First, I think maybe you just mentioned it, so let's go. Tell me about those awesome rods that you were showing me last time that I was been meaning to ask you about. Those things.
So the basic. So would you like me to start with the wonderfully simple scientific premise and then unfold it into where I get to carbon rods or something like that, or do you just want me to get to the chase of the thing that one plays with, and then maybe the science comes later? I can do it from either end. They're opposite ends.
Well, maybe go with the thing one plays with, and then we'll get into a little bit of more of the science.
Okay, so the thing to do is that it's sort of if you ever knew Calvin and Hobbes' opposite day, where everything is the opposite. Yeah. Well, it turns out the easiest way to understand what to do with your brain and your body and stuff is just opposite day. Whatever culture told you to do the opposite, right? So culture tells you to go do a bunch of exercises which repeat each other. Nah, not too much repetition. Let's skip that. It tells you to pay attention and focus on what your feelings are and stuff. Nope, let's skip that too. The problem is if your nervous system has a limit of what it's aware of, if there's certain things you aren't aware of because those muscles went dark, or certain things you can't move because those muscles went dark, then telling you to pay attention to them is not necessarily going to help.
Right.
Okay. And I, having been the most ornery yoga student in history, arguing with people who were telling me to engage my core. And I'm like, what? You tell me where that core. Nobody can explain a core.
Right.
Literally. They just say, lift your legs this way and it's supposed to happen. And it didn't happen. And I'm like, okay. And they just kind of out. So I got to realize how important it is whether you have conscious access to the sensory and motor stuff that everybody thinks you ought to. Because if you're too far outside the center field, you're just doubling down on doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So it would be really wonderful to have a sort of a guaranteed right way of giving your nervous system what it wants without having to rely on your conscious system as a gatekeeper, right? And so the first question then is, so the carbon rods are basically, they're things you can think of it as a massage tool.
Yeah.
Broadly
can you hold it up to the
okay, so they're here are two different ones. This one is about 1 centimeter wide. It's a box beam. It's about the stiffest thing I don't know how well you can hear that, but it's got a
can hear
very
it, yeah.
high sort of ceramic sound to it. This other one is thicker and it's round and it's got a twill, so it's actually got a kind of a fabric texture to it. But carbon fiber is practically the highest strength to weight ratio or stiffness to weight ratio substance that you can find outside of diamond and other things in that crazy category. It's like up there in ceramic. It's super lightweight, it's super stiff. That means it's super good at transmitting and carrying ultrasonic waves. Now, the one piece I'm injecting into this whole embodiment, awareness, intuition thing, when I was talking about what you have conscious access to, is I'm jacking into the unconscious with these.
Yeah.
What you have conscious access to is roughly something up to maybe 10 kilohertz, or a sound, right? You can imagine a sound which you can hear. You have conscious access. But once it slides past that into the ultrasonic, you can't hear it and you can't feel it. I mean, you can't feel it in any normal way. However, those are the waves which carry the most information. Just like an FM signal carries better sound quality than an AM signal, a 1 megahertz wave carries much better than 100 kilohertz, and 100 kilohertz carries better than a 10 kilohertz, by a factor of 10. So the distinctly unconscious ultrasonic waves rattling through our bodies are not only the only source of information our brains have about what our bodies are doing, but they're also specifically inaccessible to us. Our brains have learned not to notice them, because if we actually notice something that fast, we'd slow ourselves down, right?
Wow.
You literally, the problem with consciousness is it has to be slow to avoid slowing down the unconscious system.
Yeah.
You know?
That's the
We weren't
paradox.
meant to be conscious, we were meant to move.
Right.
And so basically my premise is the brain is just managing vibrations in the body. It's the simplest, stupidest thing you want. It's like a super collider of vibrations. You know, you got the super collider computer, and then you got the particles spinning around the track, and the computer figures out how to bunch up the particles and keep them together.
Right.
That's what our brain does with sound waves in the body. And I know this not because I've done any overtly testable experiment with oscilloscopes and data recording, but because the laws of math say it couldn't possibly be any other way. And that's my weird degree of confidence. Once I see the laws of math say this thing, I'm like, yeah, fine. Call me wrong. I've been saying things like this for 30 years.
Right.
Last time somebody called me wrong, they were wrong. I got to answer them in print. And so, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the only information source in a body to do what we know brains do is ultrasonic waves. And these things are like flutes, or they're like ultrasonic flutes. Because one of them, it's just like a long chime or a xylophone thing. You ping it and it goes, bong! It rings quite nicely. It's a long, thin stick, and it rings in a particular way. These are long, thin sticks, and they also ring, but maybe a factor of 100 or 1,000 higher frequency. So it's exactly like a tuning fork or a xylophone. Well, exactly like a xylophone, a little like a tuning fork. But if you connect it, this ultra-hard thing, without soft tissue, you have to connect it to the nervous system directly. How do you connect some nice, stiff, hard thing to the nice, stiff bones which are rattling around without all this mushy muscle stuff?
Yeah, how do you do that? I mean, if you're not Elon Musk and don't
like
have
this. Teeth, enamel. No soft tissue. You just clamp. I will hold this thing in my mouth like a cigar.
Yeah.
While I'm driving, right? It doesn't cost me anything. But while it's in my teeth, my nervous system is, instead of having the vibrations just going through my jaw, now some of them are going into this carbon and they're rattling around and coming back like an echo chamber. And the brain loves echoes. Oh my God. Micromimicry. The two things, the brain loves novelty and the brain loves echoes. Put a kid in a pedestrian tunnel, right? Or a cave. Just put a kid in a cave. Can they stop yelling?
No.
Exactly. It's like echo, echo, echo. Hey, here, listen to me. Echo, 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 right? We can't help it when we get a cool return signal, which is kind of beyond the noise. Well, you just apply that principle into the ultrasonic, and you can either take something like carbon fiber, which is a very lightweight thing, take something, I've got a titanium rod, little 2 millimeter titanium pieces of metal. They're super ringy. Again, in the ultrasonic, again, put it in your teeth. Or you can put it against some place on your myofascial system, like the brow spot or the unicorn spot, or, you know, maybe on the midline, just a sore spot, right? But the principle is a trigger spot in the sense that body workers and stuff understand trigger spots. Those sore spots, they're sore because your brain doesn't quite have the information it needs. Its job is to manage vibrations and know what's where, but here is some spot on your cheekbone where it's kind of sore because the muscles going up and down say it's over here, and the muscles going right and left say it's over here, and the two are off by a millimeter or something. So when you press it, your brain says, hey, hold it, I don't like that, it doesn't agree, it doesn't make sense. So discomfort is data. The discomfort, the mechanical discomfort we feel almost always is not damage. It's data about the brain complaining about essentially a bad data map of that area of the body. And so here's the crux point. If you do the normal Western thing and say, oh my God, I'm uncomfortable, let me get a thicker pad in my shoe and let me get a heat mat thing and take some Advil, we get rid of the discomfort. We get rid of the data problem by essentially covering it up and padding it out. But what was designed in nature is the discomfort is telling us what we need. That is telling us exactly the data points we need for the brain to solve the problem. So if we run away from it, we make the problem worse. So anyone who does, let's say, foam rolling as a principle, if you know what foam rolling is?
Yes, I do.
Okay, cool. Now, so what I propose is iron rolling. Foam is the wrong thing to use because foam absorbs the vibrations and doesn't reflect them. Whereas if you had something, and I don't have one here, let me show you, just prove it's a real thing. This, maybe 10 pounds or something, it's got a couple millimeters of PVC rubber or something like that on the outside.
Yeah.
But when you can mount this, you can just let it sit on some place on your skull.
Yeah.
Or you can kind of mount it behind your neck, or you can lie on the ground and put it behind your neck or something. But the fact that it's iron and it's got a very consistent layer of elastomer in between it and you means that it starts pushing on those bones, and your bones are jittering away.
Right.
But the iron is not jittering away, it's just iron. And so your bones are a few ounces of calcium, and your brain is resolutely tugging on the muscles and trying to jitter that thing in a way it makes sense. And that iron is pressing back on the bones slowly, saying, keep on vibrating, no rush. I got all day, I'm iron. Right? So it's like your nervous system in competition with something like that has to give up after a while.
Oh, yeah.
If you try to like lay on that thing as if it were a pillow, which isn't comfy, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
It will align your neck. Your neck cannot survive forever being misaligned if it's draped over something that hard and solid, which is just sitting there. And so between something ultra hard and solid at one end, like iron, and something ultra resonant like this, which can ring like a tuning fork, or I've got versions a meter long, it can connect two people.
Right.
Or it can connect your throat to your sternum, or it can connect your sternum to somebody else's sternum. Which means this weird sense of you're sharing balance. It's like your nervous systems are combined, even though you're 3 feet apart.
Yeah.
So the ability of connecting the nervous system to things which are strictly unconscious, they're so far in the unconscious that you couldn't expect to feel them, is weirdly enough a way of supercharging practices like yoga or Pilates or breathwork or something like that. It's complementary.
There's really something to that. It's like, I feel like there's an inherent aspect of meditation, which of course is about connecting and rooting into what would otherwise be unconscious, thoughts, programs, feelings, things that, that the information that is there, but that has become out of our purview for whatever reason, whether it be habit or just the limits of the conscious mind. But I feel like there's certainly a correlation between what you're talking about in a physical 3D way, and then some of the practices that we've developed, but that the goal is the same, and that is to connect to what otherwise would be unconscious aspects of ourself. So that's kind of awesome.
Well, what's cool is that basically, if you go all the way into the mathematics of representation, what does it mean for this group of atoms over here to make a running copy of that group of atoms over there? So our brains are making a copy of the outside world, and it's good enough that we just use it. But when you look at how is that possible in the first place? How do you get the information in there? How do you let it move around so it doesn't waste itself? How do you keep the thing updated and so forth? That process is as I said earlier, part of it is about fooling yourself. But the other part is about understanding the trade-offs between essentially bandwidth and, I don't know, spatial resolution or something like that. So once you're in the game of trying to figure out, get your nervous system attuned with nature or with the outside world or whatever your kind of meditation goal is, the problem is that the process of checking how well you're doing messes up the thing you're trying to do. Just like the computer programs I said.
Yeah.
The process of keeping track of how well you did slows you down and winds up being the big problem. So that's what monkey mind is.
Yeah.
The nervous system as a muscle control system did not evolve to freeze frame anything.
Wow.
No memory.
Think
Now,
about how much
muscle
we
memory,
freeze frame.
coordination memory is fine.
Yeah.
But remembering this was happening, you said these words on this date under these circumstances, it's remarkable that a real-time control system is capable of freeze framing an episode and recalling it later.
And we're so, our survival instincts come loaded with this ability to freeze frame the most heinous shit that could happen to us. And then we wonder why we're so, well, yeah, that's why we end up so traumatized.
Well,
because
okay.
then we replay it and we replay it and we replay it. And it's like this crazy, yeah.
Yes. So there's another way of saying the same thing even more starkly, which is that if you think about it, memory is something which can be formed very quickly. One traumatic incident can be seared on your brain for decades, right? That's clearly a thing. So our memories we can form memories instantly. We have no mechanism for getting rid of them instantly. We can form them fast, but once they're there, it's like writing on a whiteboard with a Sharpie. That is there. You just have to wait for it to fade. And so, among other things, this is why old people like me start kind of losing our memory. Because we've been writing over each thing. It's like graffiti written over graffiti written over graffiti for 60 years.
Yeah.
The fact that there's no way to get rid of old memories, whereas there is a way to add new ones, it's just that's an asymmetry. How can it not pile up?
Right. Right.
And so the monkey mind is part of just the nature of being able to remember in the first place.
It reminds me of a meme I just saw that it had two people meditating. One was sitting there going, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating. And on top of her, it said not meditating. And then the other person, it was just like this blank bliss. And then it said meditating. This kind of reminds me of like monkey mind.
Yeah, that's the way it is. But essentially, what we need to do is the two things that humans need to be able to relearn really soon, if we're going to keep from essentially just disconnecting from everybody, Kids disconnect from parents, friends disconnect from friends, everybody sits in their house until they kill themselves or something.
Yeah.
What it's going to take is two things. One is for people to recognize what flow and awareness really feels like.
Yeah.
It isn't being able to authenticate it. You have to give up yes, this is it, and I have absolutely definitely arrived. Yeah, the certainty thing has to go. You can't have the certainty because it gets in the way. The other is connection. We are the most intricately social species the planet has ever seen. We make bonobos look like monks or something like that as a species, and yet right now, because primarily of digital devices, people don't even look each other in the eye anymore.
No.
So, I could make the case easily, biophysically, that Homo sapiens has already dialed down our social information flow by about 98%.
Yeah.
I could easily defend 95%, and I might have to work at it to do 99%. But somewhere in there, we have clearly reduced the amount of information we get from each other in bandwidth and authenticity and latency and relevance and everything, so that we are essentially going through a collective sociosensory isolation experiment.
We're young and learning. No, it really reminds me of something that I wanted to ask you about that. And I noticed this correlation, and it's like, you see it in the young people in their interaction. And of course, some people are older and are still of that mindset, but, technology whether you're talking about the switch from film cameras to digital. And so, you have some directors that will not go to digital, even though they are, sworn by and so much more convenient. You can do so much more with them. They swear that you do not have the depth that you do with a old fashioned camera that you can put film in and shoot with, right? And same thing with, and I know you know about this. I know you wrote about it. And it just reminded me of what you wrote about how, yeah. And there are some people who swear that the LP, was the last great sound we had, and that the digital age of the CD and what came afterwards it's just not the same. Somehow it's not the same, even though all the levels say it's the same. The people are saying that it's not the same. Just like the same thing with directors in film, like, they say this does everything that those other cameras did, but then when you look at it, it's, and I'm sure technology is catching up to that now as it gets better and better. But it's like, what seems to me is we lose depth with some of our technology. And we lose depth with each other as we gain in technology. And it's like, so yes. We have to find that happy balance, that medium where we realize the pitfalls of some of the things that we're creating out of convenience, and when we learn to navigate them so that we don't lose the depth that we have and the connection that we need.
Yeah, that's that metaphor of essentially kind of the compression ratio of how much how much detail you get from something was the central one that we had in our paper. Sensory Metrics of Neuromechanical Trust is this monster 60-page paper that we got out through a super prestigious peer-reviewed mathematical journal. So it's like, call it the deep learning journal, or one of a couple deep learning journals. So it counts as official science as much as any mathematical science can be. And it hasn't been attacked in like 6 years or something. So it's pretty much the truth. This is kind of how things work. And the problem is that once you calculate how, so what was the example you were giving? I remember I pegged my thing to an example of resolution you had.
Well, I was using the digital cameras versus the old film cameras.
Yes, right. So weirdly enough, I talked to somebody, just a photographer, a week or so ago who has a local studio, and I said, "Oh my God, I love your pictures. They're so great. I love analog old film and stuff like that." And after a while, he kind of uncomfortably said, "Actually, yeah, these pictures are digital, and it's even better than 35 millimeter." So I'm not in a position to say that digital film is worse than analog film because they both have frames. I mean, film chops the world into frames which flash, 50 or 20 to 50 times a second, but the sensitivity of the nervous system is at microseconds. So frame rate is at least a factor of 1,000 slower than we're capable of sensing. And so in that sense, I can't speak to that. But the sound one, as you said, I wrote an article, How Science Got Sound Wrong. Our audio systems evolved for microsecond discrimination. The fact that we can hear distinguished sounds near to each other, second best to the barn owl.
Wow.
The barn owl can catch a mouse in pitch black by listening to the scratching sounds, right? We're not that good, partly because we can't fly. But our ears are this funny shape precisely so they can tell where things came from. Because for our ancestors, it's much more important to hear where a twig snapped in the dark than to hear what kind of wood it was. We needed to know where things are. Right. That's what our ears are for, long before words. We could make noises to each other, but locating things is key.
Right.
And so once you get that we're locating things, that forces you into understanding we do microseconds. That forces you into saying, what the heck did CDs do? Because CDs chop things into chunks 50 microseconds long. At least 10 times longer than we need to do the stuff we're good at. So the very nature of chopping continuous sound into pieces is going to destroy it unless you can be guaranteed that the pieces you're chopping it into are much more closely spaced in time than what your brain needs. And we have done the opposite. Wow. We are the CDs chop things into 50 microsecond chunks, but by the time you get to MP3s and things like that, it's chunks milliseconds long, which are just assumed combinations of all sorts of sounds that they think we want to hear. But digitization has profoundly undermined the nature of our nervous system interacting with the real world. However, that's what people recognize.
Yeah.
The tests on this, the tests on audio frequency come from, do you hear this sound? And they play
Yeah.
a regular sine wave. Well, our ears didn't evolve to hear sine waves like that. They
Right.
didn't evolve to hear frequencies. So the fact that we can't hear it doesn't really mean we're not capable of doing other similar things.
Right.
So they measured our sound abilities wrong. They built our sound technology wrong. They tested whether it works based on what we are consciously aware of, which means they missed the lower 99% of it.
Wow. Yeah.
So the fact that we are building sound technology based on what we're consciously aware of, rather than what the nervous system actually needs, which are incredibly different since we fool ourselves so wonderfully, it's like, of course, we're having conversations which are unfulfilling, and we think we're connecting, but the numbers say we've thrown away 99% of what we need.
My God. Yeah. I mean, that's fucking huge. That's like, that's everything right there. It's,
Yeah. Unconscious, it's hard to deal with unconscious.
yeah,
How does the market do that?
it really is. I mean, it's subject to, and obviously, algorithms get better and better at figuring out how to take advantage of the way that our subconscious works, because like you were saying earlier, there's the eye of Sauron has gotten bigger and larger because it's being able to collect this data and in ways that the conscious mind is for the most part unaware. Only when you really step back and look at what's happening in the bigger picture of everything, and take as many filters as you can off, all the political filters, all the well, this company's good. Just look at what they're doing. You can really kind of start to get a bigger picture of things. And like, my God, they are good at collecting data, and they're making a fortune off it. So they're incentivized to collect more data.
The one word I like to point out the subtlety of is the word they. Because in the land that I'm coming from, which is looking at commercial influences propagating like sound waves over the centuries, it's just like, what kind of technology moved this way and that? What kind of monetization system? What kind of business model? What kind of communications technology? All of these things evolve over centuries, and they involve people, and then people invent new technologies, and the technologies influence people. So there's a whole bunch of feedback loops. But roughly, you can divide all of the forces at work. And this is a huge, grandiose claim over all of history. But you can do reasonably well saying which are the things which were done by humans and which were the things which were done by non-humans. How much of what we're doing is because we are flesh and blood and have hair and skin and, lips and things like that, versus how much is caused by the cave paintings and the stone tools and the tractors and the spreadsheets and the cameras and all the things which are not warm human beings. Now, once you divide it into that kind of weird way, but it's a good way, because all of the other animals only have one of those. Every other animal on Earth only has the warm body part. We get to see how they interact as warm bodies. It seems to work. We're the only one who has stuff we made. You could call it machines in general, or the machine. If you want to go back 100 years to E.M. Forster's amazing short story called The Machine Stops, which is basically presaging everything. It is the best of the dystopias. It beat Ray Bradbury and Orwell and Huxley, all of them. Even Snow Crash. But The Machine Stops is it. And so the machine, you can call it, that's the net aggregate of stuff which is self-reinforcing. You can call it capital, although it existed before there was anything called money. It's, material power. And now we've got, not only do we have gadgets and computers and cameras and IoT things, which are looking around at the world and observing our every move and our every breath and trying to figure out how to get more money out of our pocket based on it. But we've got, let's see, so there's sorry, I lost my train of thought. a huge amount of data flow, which is going into these machines. We've got our inability to know what's happening with it. And we've got the fact that capital tends to self-aggregate. So whatever laws are there, whichever organized group of resources or capital gets to buy legislators or buy ad space, can incrementally get its opinions into the system. So there's the nature of material power begets more material power. Chimps didn't have that problem. Bonobos didn't have that problem. Ants didn't have that problem.
No, they
We
didn't.
are the ones. We have created a system of material stuff, which by every measure I can think of is running us. The material stuff via the spreadsheets is in charge. The laws of capital aggregation are telling us how we have to work and pay rent. They are not telling us how we have to stay alive. Staying alive is optional. Paying rent is mandatory.
That's right.
Therein lies the problem.
Therein lies the problem. Right down the board, right down the line. You could take that right literally into every system that we have in place, and you can figure out the problems that we have as a society from that statement, because that's what I see, as the biggest challenge for us right now, is to realize that the systems in place are hurting us because they are monetized not for our well-being, but for the corporation's bottom line, and it's like, yeah. But I think the more people, come into a kind of conscious realization of what's happening, and that comes with kind of like, realizing that the world isn't exactly what they were told it was, and there's a bit of a betrayal in that, in beginning to see things for how they are. I noticed that there a lot of people kind of throw up their hands and they're like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to think about that.
Well, it's the sad thing. Yes, we're social creatures.
Yeah.
And so not only do we not want to think about things which are sad and bleak, but we are so incentivized and attuned to jumping in to tell our friends it's not that bad.
Right.
So if you're trying to understand how the world works and you're in a room full of people, somebody wants to jump in and say, oh, no, it's not that bad. The internet is here to stay.
Yeah.
Like, no, the internet damn well better not be here to stay or we're dying,
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can't, our conversational habits and our social habits are dead set against this kind of cold, rational understanding of where we've gone wrong.
Yeah.
It's sort of like if you lived in nature, you could get by just solely on intuition without actually having to think through anything. But now we live in a land of digits and rules.
Yeah.
The only way to clarify the solution is to go all the way to look at the best rules of all, the rules of math and theoretical physics, and say, what do those rules tell us is going on?
Yeah.
Because the laws of whatever Congress passed, that's like neither here nor there.
Right. No, it's neither here nor there. Most of those laws were bought and paid for anyway. I mean, half of them anyway. Most recent ones.
I have been so much happier since I stopped paying much attention to the internet.
Yeah, man. I mean, I can tell that about you, and I'm leaning in that direction. I kind of go in spurts and waves, and a couple weeks on, and then I find myself a week on, and I'm like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? What am I doing? Why am I wasting my time? But I like knowing what's happening, even if it is frustrating. But the problem is, the sources are unreliable, and then some things aren't worth knowing, because you can't change them.
Well, but I have a sort of unique. I have like one of the most incredibly arrogant sets of backgrounds for some of these kind of conclusions. But when I was in the data scientist role, and my job was roughly speaking, get the root password to the database, run a bunch of queries, look at stuff, make some charts and equations, and then tell the board and the CEO what's true and what's false.
Right.
Because, how to read the numbers buried there is kind of a black art.
Right.
And you can do that. But while I was doing, where was I going with this? The thing you learn from that is that most numbers are a distraction, and most of the things people argue over are dumb. Yeah. I heard the executive team once, have a multi-hour argument about whether to worry about a 20% drop in revenue. And it turned out they were talking about dropping from 10 clicks to 8 clicks or something like that. It was
Wow.
utterly in the noise. But if
Yeah.
you can't tell what's noise, then you can't tell what's signal. And
Mm.
the process of understanding how easy it is to have bad data. And that was kind of my job.
My
I
God.
didn't get to
Yeah.
ask anybody else. I got to decide what's good and what isn't. At that point, I realized I'm going to walk away from something which isn't good. You realize how easy it is to get stuff which is not worth your time because you could spend all day on it. It's still not worth your time.
Yeah.
And that's the reason that I just avoid so many news sites and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Once I've realized, say, the New York Times just changes their articles months later, they just remove the content and replace other words under the same title. I can't even trust the same damn thing is going to be there, much less that it's true, much less that it's meaningful.
Literally now they literally print the opposite of what they said just 2 months before without ever mentioning the fact that I mean, like, you can hold the article up and see
Mhm.
that it's and the of course the mainstream does the same thing. And
Yeah, the FTC is right now discussing an incredibly important issue. It's under the topic called dark patterns on the web, which is just the tip of an iceberg. So the idea is a dark pattern is some kind of web page which uses chicanery to convince you to do something you wouldn't do otherwise. So, for example, you get the choice between, yes, I want you to collect all my personal information and help me be a wonderful customer, versus, no, I suck and I'm stupid, right?
yeah,
So when web pages do things to coax you one way or another, but a lot of it's information hiding, and given that they get to build a web page, of course they can alter your perception. That's kind of what the purpose of a web page is to adjust your perception. So the FTC is investigating what it means that there are these various patterns out there which are overtly deceptive. What does it mean that web pages and other information sources can be deceiving you? My wife's testimony to the FTC when they took it a couple months ago was saying this is especially bad for kids because they're still learning. And if you
right.
just keep deceiving them and keep gamifying their existence and keep yanking the stuff under their eyeballs
Yeah,
and swapping that with something else, their brains will be scrambled and they will be anxious and depressed and everything else, which is all absolutely true. Of course, you
right.
can't give bad data to learning people. So the FTC is in a position to decide, is deception okay? And I wrote a comment for him, like this 12-page essay saying, essentially, I called it Laws of Nature versus Legal Fictions.
Right.
And there are various things that the law treats as true. For instance, that if you warn somebody you're going to do something bad, you're covered.
Right.
So it's like, I am going to warn you. So I make you click on something. I'm about to subconsciously manipulate you, and you click
Right.
OK. Well, you
Right.
can't do anything about subconscious. That's why they call it subconscious. Duh, right? So the legal system has in place the idea that certain things can be prevented merely by saying you're going to do it, or they can
Saying
be
that may happen,
remediated,
yeah.
that if you scramble a child's brain by lying to them through their edtech platform, that you can pay their parents a little bit of money and undo it, right?
Yeah.
The idea that these things can be reversed, they can be correctable, they can be compensated for, it's all nonsense.
It is.
If you look at actual neuroscience or you look at machine learning, I don't care whether you take tech or biology, they both say the same thing. You
Yeah.
cannot expose learning systems to major amounts of deception and have them come out unscathed.
No.
So the American government has to decide whether deception, whether basically automatic lying is okay. Because
Yeah.
if machines are allowed to make micro lies which add up, nothing true will ever exist again.
Yeah.
Because all incentivized communication is bent one way or another toward the money.
That's right. And when you have humans and algorithms alike predicting based on, what the past experiences, which are being filled in this way that is faulty and false and deceptive, then you have a recipe for catastrophe and disaster. And I'm
Yep.
just like, everybody needs to wake up and speak up because I mean, look, they're incentivized to keep going with it. Why would they stop? And they got enough money to throw at the FCC, the CDC, the FBI, you name it, every acronym ever invented. There's more than enough money to go around for everyone. They've proved that over and over. But the people, we have to remember that these corporations, these governments are in place for us, that there's no such thing as federally funded. It's taxpayer funded. It's all the money that they're taking out, or they're taking out in our name. It's not like the loans are going to be paid back by them. This is our government. This is our world. We have a responsibility to take care of it. And I just think that the more people hear that, the better off we're going to be, the better chance we have of righting the ship. So I like saying it.
The answer. So the ideology we're up against is the ideology which basically says that organizations are free to run around and figure out ways to make money. So organizations have a certain amount of freedom to go off and essentially expand and exploit.
Yep.
Now, if something goes wrong, individuals are tasked with defending themselves. That's a kind of an individualistic philosophy. It's all over America, kind of Wild West and stuff like that. Here's the problem with just the part I said. The idea that organizations are allowed to exploit, but individuals are on their own to defend themselves? How am I supposed to defend myself from Amazon? Amazon gets to be an organization and gets to have tax defense from the government for, its profit and enforcing its labor laws and stuff like that, whereas I have to individually do it. No. The only way to get this is to have the government, collective action. People need to get together and say, we want our children not to have their brains fried.
Right.
If the next generation of humans is going to be able to look each other in the eye and be able to hold on to their own babies without freaking out, which is a problem already, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
If humans are going to exist as a species capable of nurturing each other, there needs to be collective action taken against the collective action which is against us.
Right.
Amazon is collective action against the human nervous system.
That's right.
So is Google, so is Facebook. Therefore, there needs to be collective human action in opposition, because my individual brain cannot survive a billion pixels designed and laser aimed at fooling me in particular.
That's right.
It is too much to ask me to do that. It is mathematically impossible for it to work.
And you could take it one step further, and you could say, these chemical companies, these pesticide companies between Monsanto, DuPont, Johnson & Johnson. I mean, the companies have been around since the dawn of the industrial age. They've amassed such wealth and power, and there's been literally virtually no checks and balances. They've been able to hide. They've made enough money where there's no penalty they can get, no matter how many billions they pay out. And they have the money to fight it in court and delay. I mean, you have Monsanto paying one person at a time. They can do that until the year 3000.
The only way to basically, if you look at it in the reference frame of the problem space, if you look at how much money, so let's say Scott Galloway's analysis a few years ago about the big four, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple. He essentially proved that each one of them specializes in hacking the human nervous system in a different way. Amazon hacks acquisitiveness, Apple hacks sexiness, Google hacks curiosity, and Facebook hacks sociability. Fine. And each one is specialized in it. So we've got, and he made this case that these companies already have monopolies. So not only are they hacking our nervous system, they also have monopolies from the point of view of how much market power they exert.
They absolutely have monopolies.
Yeah. So that is an incredible case. My only problem is, what is his suggestion? That we need to return to market forces. He's saying that monopoly is bad, therefore we need to go back and let the market forces happen. No. The market forces are what is exploiting us. Right. The fact that some other entity gets paid when it can distract me. It puts a billboard, it flashbangs something in front of my eyes, money shows up somewhere else. Right. It's like a robocall, right? This is a world of robocalls. And that economy cannot work. You cannot have an economy benefiting humans in which the primary activity is exploiting humans.
Right.
And so the weird place for me, as a physicist and as somebody who kind of grew up with this idea of waving the banner of mathematical truth, is that in some sense it ought to be the easiest thing in the world, because I'm saying that all I'm asking for is 2 + 2 = 4. I'm not asking for anybody to agree to anything which is not mathematically and obviously true, like bad information destroys learning kind of thing. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've yet to meet a person who will disagree with me. So as far as I can tell, all the CEOs and the people we blame as being evil actually have wives.
Yeah.
And they actually have children, and they like looking at the children's eyes as they do stuff, and they like cuddling their wives, and they get to actually be normal human beings, and they really do not want to destroy the human species.
No, half of them
My
think they're saving
impression
it.
is they don't actually want to be Darth Vader and Voldemort rolled into one.
They don't. Half of them think they're saving the world. I think.
So in addition to that, and all the stuff I'm telling them is true. So if they actually care about the world, then they'll listen to me and they'll agree. Because, there isn't really an answer to this stuff, which doesn't require violating common sense. Mm-hmm. But the other piece is that those people and these companies hire quants. The upper end are like the statistical coders for Google and Goldman Sachs and places like that. The ones who do the sort of stuff I did. They do the numbers, and they know exactly how much data they can wring and how much noise they can squeeze out. Those quants are there because they believe the laws of math. Just like me. I was one of the first quants. And I believed them and did it and changed my life based on it. So the people whose job is to actually drive the Death Star and to build the Death Star, those people are the ones who are first in line to understand how evil the Death Star is. Because the mathematics by which the Death Star can exploit us is the same mathematics by which we can rescue ourselves. So the weird paradox is the human beings who are nominally in charge have families and children they care about who are warm-blooded and are being damaged by this.
Yeah.
And are being essentially directed by people with a mathematical training, which makes it inevitable for them to understand how the damage is.
Yeah.
So there are two different threads which are against the thread of there's so much capital we can't stop it.
Yeah. And so, God, we have to hope for the human conscience to. I mean, and you see it happening. You see people leaving these companies and becoming whistleblowers and saying, "Look, I can't. I see what they're doing, and I'm done." And more it's happening. And you know what? Wisely, there are elements of society that are stepping up and positively reinforcing and rewarding those people for those careers. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to walk out of a massive, powerful company like Google and say, look, this is what they're doing, because Google could very much decide to make your life, pretty miserable in a lot of ways if they want to.
Yeah, well, I believe that's actually what they do. Basically, as soon as their researchers come out with news that their product is bad, the researcher gets fired, and all their research is suddenly retroactively considered shoddy.
Right.
I mean, I remember there was a CEO who decided that he told me to lie to the investors, and when I didn't, he fired me a month later.
Yeah.
So
people don't understand that how often this goes on. Whether you're talking about, you're talking about the tests that people want to, there's a reason why they don't want to test 5G. There's a reason why they rolled it out. But why there's never actually been a biological test between a human and its interaction with some of the towers that they're putting up at 5G. They don't want the results. They don't. And you have people who came out and said, well, we did test it, and we gave them our results, and they said, no, thank you.
Well, I'll tell you the one thing. So in general, I'm not interested at all in the sort of the how Wi-Fi damages people stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's a very subtle kind of thing, and it's not nearly as obvious to me as how pixels damage people.
Right.
It's easy for me. I can just see that because I studied neuroscience and information processing forever, and it's a slam dunk.
Right.
Now, but it's clear that the energy density of Wi-Fi signals and cellular signals is much smaller than the energy density which would cook the neurons or cause any damage like that. The piece which I haven't seen in the literature, which I know from all the stuff I'm saying, is the human brain is sensitive to microseconds and possibly nanoseconds. The brain is probably the most extraordinarily sensitive and accurate timing processor on Earth.
Yeah.
And radio waves have nothing if not precise timing.
Hmm.
So it's not the energy from the radio waves, it's the exact reproducibility of certain subtle timing intervals, which some people can feel.
Yeah,
Insofar as our brain is sensitive to single photons of light, it can be sensitive to single photons of other
absolutely.
things. And
Absolutely.
so it's the information content, not the energy.
Hmm.
Now, my guess is the same companies which don't want you to know how bad LED lights are for you are also roughly the same ones which don't want you to know how bad radio signals are for you.
Right. Oh,
But
I
the
guarantee it.
process of understanding how information affects nervous systems is just beginning.
Right.
And that's the way that you can, prove how every one of these things is likely to be toxic.
Right. Yeah, man. I think that's I think that's everything, Bill. I mean, we covered a lot, man. And
Yeah, thank you for letting me ramble on in all kinds of
oh
ways.
man, I appreciate it so much. I learned a lot from our conversations, and I end up going back over them because we put so much information in a short time. So I appreciate your expertise and your wisdom, my friend. I love what you're doing, and I think your voice is so important right now. So I was happy to give you another opportunity to talk to me, and I appreciate your time very much.
My pleasure. The one thing I'd like to leave people with is the game coming out of here is how to invent viral collaboration. We are natively a collaborative species, and the more we can learn to have play, collaborative play, which is like, balance games or coordination games or something, where we can have conversations which actually produce a conclusion at the end, and not just a list of proving how other people were wrong. Once we reinvent collaboration, play, and interactivity, all else, the whole game is going to change, because then we just won't be paying attention to the monetized, sparkly stuff.
Yeah, and they'll entropy, and they'll fall away then.
Yeah, so that's what I want to help. I want groups of collaborators to find me, and I'll help them do it even better.
Awesome, man. Well, we're going to make sure that they can in our video description, going to get them all the information they need about you and some of the things we mentioned. So hopefully we'll have some people inspired when they hear this. I know I'm inspired to come up with more things than I have. Yeah.
Cool.
But
thanks very much. This has been fun talking.
thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. Thank your wife for letting me keep you busy for a few hours here.
My pleasure. It's later for you than for me. I still get to have dinner.
That's right.
All right. Take care, Faust. Good talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.